Recently, I've been having a lot of fun running a podcast where I have been inviting different specialists, experts, practitioners, but also patients who are involved in MEN1 or who have an interest in it to come up and share what it is they think that they could help. And as I've been doing this, I've been thinking myself, what is it that brought me to do what I'm doing in MEN1? And how can I share that with people? So without actually interviewing myself, my podcast, I thought I would jump on. I thought I'd kind of share a couple of questions with answers that have helped lead me into what I'm doing and see whether there's anything in here that can help you with your journey or maybe makes you want to kind of jump in, try something new, think a little bit differently. So here goes. The first thing I asked myself is, what did my health used to be like? How did things used to be for me? So very briefly, I was diagnosed with MEN1 when I was 12. It ran in my dad's side of the family, and my sister was also later diagnosed with the condition. Things kind of lay low for about a year or so, and then as soon as I hit 13, that's when all my problems started. So my teen years were basically a roller coaster of ups and downs, surgeries, all sorts of different medications, a lot of feeling very unwell. And I remember it being a very strange time because when MEN1 lay low, when it wasn't causing any problems, it was almost as though I didn't have a condition. There was nothing really wrong with me, and I was just able to kind of get on with my life really easily. And then when things started playing up, it was a completely different kettle of fish. So I felt really unwell. I was in and out of hospital, in and out of tests and scans, of monitoring, on and off medications, talking about surgery, potentially going under the knife. And it kind of felt like I was living two different experiences. So one where most of the time things were, pretty much okay. And the other time they really, really weren't. And when they weren't okay, my response to it was I didn't want to let it affect me too much, even though it was really difficult. There was this part of me that felt super stoic, and I just thought, I'm not going to let this affect me. I'm just going to power on through life and I'm going to get on. I'm not going to let it stop me from doing anything. And I think in many ways that really, really served me because it gave me the resilience to pull through. It made me focus on what I could do rather than what I couldn't do. And I think I just got on with my life. I didn't let it stop me from doing anything that I wanted to. The flip side of that, however, was that when times were difficult, my response, instead of leaning outwards and onto other people for support, I wanted to do it all myself. And I, in some ways, maybe was like a little bit in denial that I even had the condition. And I remember not really wanting to associate with words like disease and illness. I remember it making me feel like I was weak somehow, and somehow, I should be strong, and it didn't really belong here. And I think I felt in a lot of ways quite embarrassed about it. So through those teen years, I had a really, really interesting, multifaceted experience with this condition. And as I say, when things were fine, they were fine. And when they weren't, they really, really weren't. And it was very difficult to kind of find a balance between the two. Early on in my 20s, things stayed pretty calm. And then after what had been quite a few years of stability, even having had, surgery and medication and everything, I received a hospital letter and they told me that they'd spotted some more tumours on my pancreas. And this was the third lot of tumours that had come up within, at that point I was 21, so 21 years of my life. And I just remember thinking, not again do I want to go back under the knife. And it was like all that stoicism and the strength and the resilience that had got me through the first two times, I just couldn't see myself going back into that situation. And I thought, I really, really don't want to be there. And the irony is that I actually misinterpreted the letter, and the fact was the tumours were too small to even need surgery anyway. But when I found that out, I wasn't relieved at all. The knowledge that they were there, and at some point, as we know happens with this condition, that they were going to grow and potentially need surgery, that was enough to put me in a place of fear, which I just did not want to live in. It was absolutely horrible. I remember feeling uncertain. I remember feeling anxious. It was a really, really stressful place to be. And I remember for about 48 hours, I thought, right, this is it. This is going to be the rest of my life where I'm just in and out of experimental surgeries. And I'm never really going to know what's around the corner. So I stopped for a moment and I just thought, there's this part of me that is absolutely determined not to let that happen again, not to go back into surgery. And I just made this decision. I didn't even think it was conscious at the time, but I just made this decision. And I said, if there's anything I can do to stop myself living the prognosis of this condition, to stop myself from going back into surgery again, unless it's absolutely necessary or sensible, then I'm absolutely going to do it. I'm going to do whatever I can. And it sparked in me this curiosity to ask myself, what is it that I can do? What is it that I can do from the level of myself that doesn't necessarily rely on other people? And that's really where this journey began. Fast forward some years, what are things like now? So I mentioned about that kind of pivotal moment where I thought I was on the brink of surgery, and I had made this decision inside my head that I was going to do whatever I could to have a different experience with this condition than the one I thought was laid out for me. And it was in that decision that I carried on through, and I began to just to think very differently. So without necessarily consciously doing it, I, over the course of 5 years, basically managed to accumulate a number of contacts and networks and tools, resources, knowledge that I just wouldn't have looked for had it not been for this condition and had it not been for the fact that I thought I was going to be on the brink of surgery. I remember one of the first things that happened was, seemingly unrelated to MEN1, I went and sought the advice of a functional medicine doctor who was meant to look after my gut health. And I made some changes around my diet, kind of all the classic cliched things. And I really, really did feel differently. And obviously there was no proof that that was going to change what was happening on the level of my MEN1. But the fact that I felt so different inside myself made me think, well, if this is how I was feeling and now I'm feeling like this, and all I've done is I've gone and I've thought outside the box and I've tried something different and I made some changes, could I keep doing that? So first of all, it was gut. Then I came across yoga, and that really, really taught me about taking some space to breathe, about looking after myself, about making time for myself, which at that point seemed alien because I was doing a degree at a competitive university, and it was all about pushing and getting it to the end of the day. How can I get to the end of the day as quickly as possible? So yoga taught me a huge amount. After yoga, the next thing was inner work. It was working on myself. It was working on the thoughts and the emotions and the beliefs that I had, particularly around this condition, but just generally in my life as well. And then after that, things like meditation, then it became supplements, then it became relationships, then it became communication. And then putting all of these things together, and also with this kind of inherent, I'd say, research mind that I've always had, this ability to think very critically and to be curious and run with an idea and see where it takes me. I sort of built a foundation for myself, a platform where my health no longer felt like it was totally out of my control. In fact, whatever was in my control, I just did it. I took it up and I tried it. I've experimented with so much stuff. It's all been about trial and error, picking up things that might work, seeing if they do, letting them go if they don't. And in 5 years, I've amassed this whole toolkit of knowledge and contacts and networks and different things that I can use to help me. And I feel so differently in myself now. I feel so differently about my health. It's not just physically do I feel different, it's emotionally as well. So a lot of the frustration and the confusion, the emotions that I tended to have with my health, not just the health itself, but actually the management of health, the healthcare, all seem to have either dissipated completely, or when they do come up, I've got a very, very different way of managing them and dealing with them. I reached into community. So I actually found people who were thinking like I was, and it opened up a whole spectrum of options and things that I didn't even know were there. And that was phenomenal, because I was someone who never would have reached out and done that before. And together, all these things that I've done have brought me to a space now where I feel healthier than I ever have done before. And so that means I'm fitter, I'm stronger, my results are coming back really, really well. So that's, just general health, but also my MEN1 results are all stable at the moment. And it's been 7 years since my last lot of surgery. And as we know in MEN1, that's always something that we're thinking about, is, do I need surgery or do I not need it, and when's the best time to have it? And 7 years have gone by and everything's been stable enough that I haven't had to go back in and have it, and that feels amazing. And of course, at the moment there's no proof, there's no scientific evidence to be able to say, well, if someone stops eating dairy, then they won't have to have surgery. Not at all. And in fact, I don't necessarily think it's about that. I think a lot of it is about what's the right decision for me right now. And as soon as I started putting myself back in the driver's seat and asking myself the questions, that's when things changed completely. And that's what I have now, is I'm in a position where I have the awareness and the knowledge to do that. Whereas before, it wasn't even in my radar. It wasn't on my radar, because I was so blinkered by everything that was going on, and very stressed and very concerned a lot of the time, and focused on other things as well. So bringing focus and attention to my health, to myself, and what I can do has really been, I'd say, the key to where I am. It was in this newer experience of managing MEN1 that I felt absolutely driven and passionate to share it with anyone out there who was willing to listen, because I'd got to a place in my condition where I wasn't struggling most of the time. I wasn't frustrated most of the time. I wasn't stressed most of the time. I didn't have symptoms. I wasn't on the brink of surgery. And I thought, well, what is it that I'm doing right now that I could maybe share with other people that might work for them? And if it doesn't work for them, what would work for them, and how can I help them work that out? It all became about this different level of thinking, asking a different quality of questions, looking at what is possible rather than what isn't possible. And I thought, well, if this has been my privilege over the past 5 years, and it's something that I've built as a result of my experience, how can I share that with other people? So I began to build community. I started putting things out there. I reached out to different patients. I reached out to experts and specialists, and I started to voice my own story. I started to voice what I was doing and find similarities with other people, and find points where other people were interested and wanted to have discussions and conversations. And slowly, surely, this began to grow, and people cottoned on. They came, they introduced themselves, they jumped in, they started joining in, because to them, healthcare, or their health, their disease, their MEN1, was something that they didn't want to feel as though was dictating their life experience. And actually there was a part of them that was curious and proactive and wanted them also to be in the driver's seat, to feel as though they had more of a handle on it than they'd ever had before. So that's how the community grew. That's what it became. And since then, it's been about showing up and us talking together, coming up with solutions together, bringing in different people, finding things that work, letting go of what doesn't, and essentially putting ourselves back in the center of our health, which is really where we're meant to be. And it's something I've absolutely relished doing, because not only have I learned so much about myself and been able to bring that forward, I've learned so much about other people too. And we're all different in MEN1. One thing that works for one person isn't necessarily going to work for another. But even beneath the MEN1, ultimately, we're all humans, and we are looking to progress through in the best way that we can towards a similar outcome, which is to be as healthy as possible, and ideally to avoid all those things we don't really want to have to go through. And it's that sense of drive, that sense of vision that really makes us stick together. And it's a true honor to be able to hold a space for that community and to see it growing. And we're building into some really, really cool things right now. I have met on the way not a small number of challenges in, firstly, my own health, my own experience with putting myself back in the driver's seat, with trying to work out what it is that I need, trying to find different people, but also in building a community of like-minded individuals who want to do the same. So one of the first blocks I had was actually the ability to say, I can't do this on my own. And that was very difficult for someone like me. I absolutely was fully independent. I didn't want to have anyone's help for a number of different reasons. I preferred to do everything on my own. And I suddenly got to the point where I thought, if I'm going to make tracks in this condition, if I'm going to go and change my experience of this condition, I can't do it on my own. And I actually need to find people who are thinking like me. And the problem was, I didn't think anyone thought like me. I thought I was the only person who was going through this, who had all these troubles and all these issues. And it wasn't until I started reaching out that actually I found those people and we connected and we were able to reflect on each other's stories. Certain things resonated. And at that point, I thought, I'm not alone in this. And actually, maybe we can go further together. So community came into that in a massive part. I didn't really like the word community. I didn't want to feel dependent on other people. But what I realized is that I cannot go through thinking I can do it on my own, because I can't. And if I try and do it on my own, I'm going to absolutely exhaust myself and probably make myself more ill. Another block I had was to do with managing all the different contradictions that there were in healthcare. So I had never really, I think like a lot of us, had much exposure to anything other than, what the NHS offers, which is known as conventional traditional medicine. And it had done me very well up until that point. I'd had the most amazing, successful surgery experiences. I was really well looked after. I still am, by my medical team. But I also started to branch out into, I suppose, what we know as the more holistic side. And I, for the life of me, could not see how the two worked in combination, because they were absolute contradictions of one another. And it caused me to feel really, really anxious, because I thought, well, how can I tell my doctors, my NHS team, that I'm taking supplements and I have a special diet? And then at the same time, how can I go into yoga and meditation knowing that I'm taking, medication? You can't take medication if you're doing meditation. And it was all this stuff I had in my head, and all of it utter nonsense, because none of it's true whatsoever. Life really is about balance. And I realized that it wasn't about stopping one thing and starting another, or it wasn't about a kind of either or. It was a being able to experience what I needed to do without this something in the back of my head, a voice saying, that's not going to work and you have to choose one or the other. I think it's one of the biggest mistakes that I see out there, and that I know I could have made if I'd listened to that voice in my head. And the third obstacle I had was, well, I'm not an expert in any of this. I'm a patient. I've just got the condition. I don't know, I'm not here to be able to tell people what to do. And I felt utterly like a fraud in some senses. And I thought, how on earth can I sit here on Instagram or YouTube or whatever it might be and tell people what's working for me, because I don't know it's going to work for them, and I've got no proof and I've got no scientific evidence. And it really, really bothered me. And to this day, if I'm completely honest with you, it still does sometimes. And I have to stop myself and I have to think, I'm not trying to be a doctor. I'm not trying to be a nutritionist. I'm not trying to be anything other than myself, who is a patient with an experience. And I really, really want to share it, because I think there is so much value in us coming together and supporting each other in the wins and the challenges that we've had. And that's all I'm doing. I'm just someone who's taken to social media to do it. And as soon as I got over that thing of I'm not good enough to be here, that's when I started to see results. It's when people started coming, and wanting to connect. That's when people started coming and contributing, and my community started growing. And I thought that's so valuable, and I've got to tell that out there to any patient, because the likelihood is that they have something amazing that they could share as well. And there might be a part of them that thinks, I'm not qualified to do this, or I'm not good enough. Absolute rubbish. As long as you are not trying to prescribe someone medication or trying to dictate what they should or shouldn't do, share from here, because that's where the honest, that's where the authentic truth comes through. If there is one thing I want to say to my past self, I'm going to put myself at 21 years of age. So this was me at the point, that pivotal point where I thought, I've got to do something, and I just don't know what it is, but I know there's something I can do. I would say to them, trust it. Absolutely trust it. Keep asking questions. Don't stop asking questions. Go out there and find the answer, because it's always out there. At the same time, whatever's going to lead me to the answer out there is actually from in here. So I've got to start asking myself those questions. And that's a different kind of conversation, and that involves me knowing myself. I'd also say to her, trust that everything that's happened to this point in your medical history served a purpose, and as tough or as difficult as it might have been through, I've come out a stronger person on the other side. And I think that's really, really important, because it's so easy to look back and think of those times as, really tough, and could it have been any different, and could I have done something differently? The fact is that we are where we are because of what's happened to us, or what we've chosen to do up until this point in our life. And I wouldn't be sitting here sharing this with you if it weren't for all of those surgeries I've been through, all the medication I've had to take, all the yoga I've done, all the results I've seen that have changed. And that's phenomenal. And I think it's so important to come back to that and acknowledge that.